Hi, everybody, and welcome again to the Risk Matrix Videocast podcast with James Junkin and myself, Dr. Martin. And we're going to talk to you again about some things that are up in the news lately. But first, hello, James.
We're back in the Matrix, baby, and football season's back. Roll Tide. But first, Dr. Martin, are you aware that Veriforce has an epic opportunity coming up in October?
I do, but I don't think our listeners do. I want you to tell them about it if you would.
Veriforce has teamed up with the National Association of Safety Professionals to offer their Certified Safety Manager course, the CSM course, in Houston, Texas, at the Veriforce headquarters beginning on October 16th. And this course isn't just about, lectures and slides. It's hands-on, it's interactive, and it's tailored to meet the needs of all participants, from those just starting their careers all the way up to seasoned veterans. This course ensures that you get the knowledge that you need to excel in managing a safety program and in all sorts of safety management roles. So registration is happening now, and the class is filling up fast. So visit naspweb.com/classroom. That's naspweb.com/classroom, and look for the October 16th CSM, the Woodlands course. Veriforce clients registering receive up to a $300 discount at registration. So I hope if you have opportunity, you take advantage of this outstanding offering from Veriforce and NASP.
Yep. Great courses there from NASP. I'm glad that Veriforce has in their wisdom, teamed up with NASP to give this valuable course. I know there's some great instructors on that, and you can't help but learn some really great things going into your career. So check it out. So James, today I'm going to talk about something timely, or I'm going to bring up something timely, and I'm going to put you on the spot if that's okay.
Okay.
You see what's going on in the world with some of this climate change, warming, hot weather. We're not going to get into the heat stress just this time, but what I really want to talk about is about a year ago, maybe a little bit more than a year ago, you wrote an article and you posted it on LinkedIn, and it was about hurricanes from your perspective, because you live in hurricane area of the U.S. Unfortunately, you had your home damage destroyed and have now just rebuilt it. But I want to talk about preparedness, and then I want to talk about how to react when you have to react, and what are the tools of this? Because just to mention one, I mean, we've got this hurricane that's hitting the West Coast. Hardly ever happens. Seeing some of the pictures that come out of there, and they are devastating. From every perspective, but certainly for people that don't see this kind of stuff all the time. So yeah, tell us a little bit about your article that you wrote last year, and then maybe kind of morph it, if you would, into some specifics for people who are going through unexpected weather events because of the way the world is kind of changing.
Unexpected weather events are now to be expected. And in this article I wrote for Veriforce, I focused on hurricanes because I live in the target zone, and it was like in the eye of the hurricane. And I've experienced everything from Hurricane Katrina to Hurricane Gustav to Hurricane Isaac to Hurricane Harvey to a couple of years ago, Hurricane Ida, living in the Gulf Coast. If you live in the Gulf Coast, you're going to experience hurricanes. But the point of the article was, when I was a child, these were once in a lifetime events. Everybody talked about Hurricane Betsy in 1965, or Camille that came along, or Hurricane Frederick in 79. Now, every 2 or 3 years, we're having these type of massive Category 4, Category 5 hurricane events. But beyond just the hurricanes, it's earthquakes, it's fires, it's, now we've had a tropical storm that by the time this broadcast, hopefully will be over and out of California, but the first time in 85, 88 years, they've been hit with tropical weather. Now, by Gulf Coast standards, a tropical storm is baby,
Yep.
We're having to deal with these category 5, 150-mile-an-hour wind monsters. But when you consider the topography in California and the rain and all the wildfires they've had and the burns that they have, you can,
Hawaii,
Hawaii, for example, you can
Maui.
certainly get yourself into a very dangerous situation to live through and very difficult to recover from. So, as safety professionals, no matter, we've talked this before, I don't do politics, but everybody, whatever you attribute the climate change to, the climate is changing.
Hmm.
Okay. What's causing it? I am not a meteorologist, nor am I a climatologist. I'm just a safety professional. Okay. But I can tell
Yep.
you it is hot down here. We have experienced day after day after day of 100-degree weather. Has it happened before? Yeah, it's happened before, right? But in the here and now, that creates situations where you could have out of control wildfires, right?
Yep.
And we're seeing this all over. Yesterday I was watching the news, and in California, they're getting hit by a tropical storm, and they have an earthquake. I'm like, man, somebody doesn't like
I mean, I'm not
California.
laughing. I'm not laughing at it. I'm laughing just because every time I open the news, there's something, right? And I'm with you. The wildfires, the hurricanes, mudslides. This is one other thing you mentioned. Um, and it seems like they're hitting with more frequency. FEMA, they do have, I don't want to say used to have, but they may have to update that. But they do have a, 100-year this and 500-year
Right.
that and 50-year that, and things are changing. And I'll bring it up here to the Northeast, right? Things are changing up here. Back in the 70s, we used to have snowstorms, right? That are also emergency situations
Yeah.
that we'd get 6 feet of snow, right? And now we hardly get a thing. And so again, no matter what your politics are, things are changing, and the hazards are changing. The types of things that you have to deal with are changing. So, I mean, what are some easy steps for, and I'm going to say safety professionals, but even for personal people in personal situations, what should they be doing or we be doing in order to prepare, ride it out, and recover?
Well, the first thing, like any other hazard, is you got to determine what the hazard is. If I'm in Wyoming, I don't really need to worry about a hurricane preparedness plan, right? So,
Hmm.
what's the hazards? The hazards in Wyoming are not the same hazards that are in the Gulf Coast, or not the same hazards that you have on the West Coast, right? So, you got to determine what your hazards are. If you're talking about for a organization that is very broad geographically throughout the United States, you really need to start thinking about, hey, our response plan cannot be cookie cutter, because the needs of people along the Gulf Coast in Texas and chemical plants are not the same as the needs in North Dakota,
Hmm.
and working that in.
Hmm.
So, a good hazard assessment. The other thing you mentioned related to that hazard assessment is this historical tracking by FEMA of 50-year storms, 100-year storms, 500-year storms, etc. Well, understand what happened during that time frame, and people now live and work in areas that they did not used to 100 years ago. The
Hmm.
topography's changed.
We've changed the topography, right? I mean,
We have.
when Hurricane Katrina came and it wiped out the levees and it did all this damage, we have to recognize that in order for progress, we're filling in places that weren't ever meant to be filled in, right?
Right,
And made them land, right?
right.
We are deforesting places that weren't deforested before. We are building to meet demand in places that have a little bit more risk, right?
Absolutely. And let me give you an example of having a good threat assessment. So, I don't recall right offhand the company that was involved, but it was during Hurricane Harvey. And Hurricane Harvey hit Texas, the Houston area, Galveston, the western part of Louisiana, and it dumped a tremendous amount of rain, a tremendous amount of
Hmm.
rain. And that created a great flooding potential just from the rainstorm. Now, normally when we think about flooding, when we're dealing with hurricanes, we're thinking about storm surge. Well,
Right.
this created flooding inland from the rain. Okay, so there's a chemical processing plant on the outskirts of Beaumont, Texas, sort of around Orange, Texas, in that area, just to the east of Houston, and it became isolated with the floodwaters.
Mhm.
Well, the particular chemical they had on site had to be maintained at a certain temperature. Though the temperature control was run by backup generators when it lost public service power. The floodwaters flooded the generators, fried them out, and now they had no power to the chill units. And then the chemical went critical. There was a explosion, a chemical release, and now at the time when we never want it to happen, but you certainly don't want it to happen when you got roadways completely flooded, you got first responders trying to get in, you got evacuees trying to get out. And really, where should we have thought about that? During the hazard assessment. So it's not about
And
placing blame, right? But
right.
you got to learn from other people's mistakes.
Yep.
Right?
And you have to place those hazards on a risk register, whether you think that they're likely or highly unlikely, they still need to go on the risk register. So I'll give you an example of some of the sites that I worked on when I was doing safety for a hazardous waste remediation company. Um, we did some work in San Francisco at some decommissioned Navy facilities, and we had tsunamis on the risk register. Were they likely, unlikely? I would say unlikely, but guess what? Guess what? It was on the risk register and we had a tsunami warning and it rose 2 feet and we had flooding. So even if those things are unlikely, they need to get on the risk register and they need to be reviewed every so often, at least yearly, I would say, to make sure that we are tracking that information that can inform good decisions.
So I think once you identify and you have a risk register, I'm kind of surprised, Dr. Martin, how many people don't understand what a risk register is. But if you'd like to kind of go into that just for a moment, because some people may not be familiar with the risk register.
So, I mean, there are a lot of different theories on how to put a risk register together, but to me as a practitioner, um, everything that's a hazard or a risk, right, that we can identify as a collective group goes on that register, and they are ranked according to whatever risk policy you use to calculate your risk based on what your acceptable risk is for your company, right? We're not talking acceptable risk general. We're talking
Right.
acceptable risk for your company. And a lot of people, I think, see, well, we're going to put these hazards on there, and it's just a reminder for us to mitigate the hazards that are on there. And it's not just that.
Right.
It is to put those hazards on there and mitigate them, but it's also to monitor risks that may be unlikely, but we can foresee that they may become a problem at some time in the future, right? So tsunamis, wildfires, 50, 100-year floods, loss of power, loss of power to the generators probably never happened in that chemical facility ever before, right? And nobody ever thought to put those generators on higher ground or build them on the roof or wherever they should have been.
It was,
So, uh,
it wasn't near a river. It certainly wasn't near the coast. It was well inland.
but
It
here's the thing:
never
did they risk
anticipated.
register the flood water capacity of the public sewer system? Right. That's what we're seeing now in California. Some of the pictures I see coming out of there, yes, they're on the coast, right? But many times the flooding happens because the public utilities are overwhelmed, and this
Right.
happened in Houston too, right? A lot of
Happened
areas
during
flooded in
Katrina.
Houston and during Katrina because that outflow could not be accommodated. Not only could it not be accommodated, it was underwater where it discharged. Okay, so whose risk register had that? Maybe very few companies, but that should have been on there, right? What do we do? Do we have pumps? Do we build things up higher? Do we put critical equipment up higher? I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but to me, a risk register has not every conceivable thing that you can think
Right.
about, but pretty much, right? And you don't throw anything off. It's okay to have stuff at the bottom of the risk register that you only revisit once a year, okay? But they should be there because what you don't know can always bite you.
Can always bite you. If anything, with my experience dealing with hurricanes, tornadoes, extreme flooding events, living on the Gulf Coast, if anything this has taught me, it's one thing, and it sort of goes along with what you're saying. Preparation is the key. Preparation is the key. If you go onto the Weather Channel, you listen to your local government officials and all that stuff we're going to talk about, they all tell you to get a plan and work your plan. But for businesses, preparation is more complex than it is for persons, right?
Mhm.
And so, you got to think about, what's my risk? Do I have the right amount of insurance coverage? Number one. Number two, knowing when to leave.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, that may seem like an easy decision, but it can be more complex. You may have a company that has critical operations, and some people have to stay, and some people have to leave. And then some people that are staying, there comes a point when they have to leave. So those decision-making processes need to be done way before these events occur. So if you get your risk register, you put the risk on there, and then what do we got to do to mitigate it?
Or
When
prepare for it,
we're
right?
prepared for it, right?
Which is a business continuity plan in essence, right? You're putting together what your business looks like in a crisis. Now, I just want to add one thing before I let you continue down that vein, because I think this is a really good conversation. Um, don't rely when you put things on the risk register and you say it's a low risk because XYZ will respond. Do not rely on public services unless you are certain that you are going to be covered when you need them. Okay. We go over this all the time when we talk about confined space, right? And we talk about
Right.
rescue teams in confined space. And I'm using this as an example because this is a perfect example of relying on something and using anecdotal evidence or just this is what they do, so they're going to respond. You can't rely upon a local fire department to be your rescue team in a confined space for many reasons.
Right.
Sometimes it's distance, many times it's training, a lot of times it's they have other calls and you're not the first person on their list. When they're inundated, you can pretty much guess you're not going to be able to rely on those services. And if you are relying on those services and you want to rely on those services, how have they prepared?
Right.
How have they prepared?
So if I'm in a critical plant function and I am in an area prone to earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, wildfire events, I need to already be working with my first responders so they know what the threats are to the greater community.
Mhm.
You know, inside our fence line, we can sort of deal with it. But a lot of times in these major natural disaster events, the situation goes beyond the fence line and spills over into the community. Let me give you an example. During Hurricane Katrina, Murphy Oil Refinery in Chalmette, Louisiana, as the storm approached, made a critical decision. Ended up costing the community. They had a 1 million-gallon storage tank full of crude oil. So you either fill that tank all the way up to reduce buoyancy, or you pump it all the way down. Well, it was about half full. I think it's a 2 million-gallon tank. And anyway, what happened with the rising floodwaters, the tank rose, broke off its mooring, crashed into the floodwaters, and on top of 20 feet, 16 to 20 feet of water that was inundating the community, we got 1 million gallons of crude oil on top of it.
Mhm. And that
So,
goes a long way. Any type of oil, gas, anything goes a long way
oh,
once
it's
it's
just,
released.
just disgusting. And then on top of that, you've got sewage and all the things you talked about spilling over into the community. So that's part of that. Know when to leave.
Mhm.
You can survive the storm, but it's not going to be very comfortable
Yep.
for you or your employees.
And what's it worth? What's it worth, right? I mean, on a personal level, You hear about people all the time, especially like in Maui now with the wildfires. They're losing everything, right? But you didn't lose your life, right? So that life is most important in all of these situations. And then you think about what the business functions are and how you deal with that, right? Because you never want to put your employees in a situation where they are performing their job at great risk to their personal safety.
So most of the time I see this would fall under emergency action plans. It's kind of a blend between emergency action plans and business continuity plans. Um, so you get your risk register, you understand what the threats are, and then how are we going to respond? And a lot of times, emergency action plans I see are basically limited to fire,
Mhm.
chemical
Evacuation,
release,
evacuation.
their evacuation, how to get out of the facility type of thing. So if you have a specific weather threat, and most places in the United States have some type of specific weather threat, whether it's wildfires, intense weather storm, winter storms with ice and snow and wind and all this other stuff, earthquakes, mudslides, flooding, hurricanes, tornadoes, name the season. There's probably a community inside the United States that is going to experience or be under that type of threat. Even such
Yep.
things as severe thunderstorms. Some of these severe thunderstorms come through with 70, 80 mile an hour straight line winds, and next thing you know, your business is sitting across the street. So
Mhm.
determine what the threat is, build a plan of action for what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and who the key decision makers are. So
And
where you
how you're going to
disagree,
do it and with what, okay? Because supplies matter.
supplies do matter. We're going to come to that in just a second. The first thing I would say is get your information from reputable sources. I'm not going to name the television channel, okay? But we got this kind of a joke down here on the Gulf Coast because you'll see them. The hurricane's approaching. The weather's deteriorating. It's going to be awful. And somebody's walking a dog behind them. It's not even raining, right? And the wind's
Yeah.
not even blowing.
Yeah. And there's no wind.
And
Yeah.
there's no wind. So understand that that's about selling fear and ratings, right? That's a different
Hmm.
conversation. Get your information from somebody reputable. Heed warnings from your government officials and have somebody within your company that's willing to make decisions, that gathers this, that sort of an emergency response coordinator, that activates your emergency response plan and how you're going about before the event happens. Okay. Now,
Yep.
if we're operating a facility and we're going to need people to stay behind, we have to have a plan for that too. Who are those people? And look, you're responsible for your employees, but let me tell you something as a business owner. If you've never rode out a category 4 or 5 hurricane, if you don't believe in God, you might afterward. I'm just telling you, it gets pretty gnarly, right?
Yep.
So if you're going to ask people to stay in that, have a plan for their families.
Have a plan for what's going to happen while they're staying, right?
You
Do
know,
they have food? Do they have
you
shelter?
got to
Is there a
have
place
all
for them
that.
to go?
That's taking care of them. But I'm going to tell you, as a husband, as a father, as a grandfather, I want to know my family's okay. Then I can do my job. I can't do my job if I'm worried about my family, right?
Hmm.
So make
Yep.
sure there are plans to take care of these folks' families. That requires proper planning and good communications that go back and forth that let everybody knows okay. Now we have the event coming. And this is assuming we can plan for this event, like a hurricane or a tropical storm, right? We get a lot of advance warning for that. Tornado shows up, it just drops out of the sky, comes through, wipes you out, and 3 minutes later it's gone. There's not a lot of
Hmm.
advanced planning for that. But in events we can advance plan for, snowstorms, things of that nature. Have
I
a
think
plan.
you can plan for tornadoes, right? You can't plan for when it's going to happen, but you can plan for if
Oh,
and
absolutely.
if it happens, and what are you going to do? right. You live in that belt of the Midwest where tornadoes touch down all the time. You have tornado warnings, you know, um, what is enough? Where are your supplies? How are you going to shelter people? Where are they going to go? And please don't ever think that all your government agencies are working on this on your behalf all the time, because a lot of these small towns, municipalities, even larger cities, they are they are overworked. They're probably underpaid, and this is not on their radar. They're probably thinking, well, we'll deal with it when we deal with it. But that's not, as a business owner or as a safety professional or as somebody who cares about other people, you can afford to do.
Sometimes, depending on where you're located, the first responders become victims.
Mhm.
That was the lesson from Hurricane Katrina. Too many of the responders were in the bowl that is the city of New Orleans. The National Guard, the police, the fire department, they were all inside the city of New Orleans. When the levees failed, they were trapped. They couldn't get out, couldn't get to them. So it was really a perfect strike. So uh, moving sort of beyond that, where do I go for resources to help make a plan? Let me tell you where one of the best resources, I think, ready.gov.
Mhm.
Ready.gov is a good place for not only business owners, safety professionals, operations professionals, but also as a human being on a personal level. I need a
Mhm.
plan for the house. I mean, if somebody told you you've got about an hour to get out of your house and get away from wildfire, flood, whatever natural disaster that's coming your way, what would you take?
Mhm. What would you take?
Because
And
we
is
need
it
to own
packed?
it.
Is it grab worthy? Can you grab everything you need
Need
and get
grab
out?
worthy stuff. Same thing in the business with the business continuity plan. As an individual, you need a family continuity plan, insurance documents, credit cards, bank stuff, birth certificates, you know, those type things, critical medications. If you've
Yep.
got cash, I always like to have a little cash on hand during hurricane season, because if you got to go, look, you may have money in the bank, but if the power's out, nobody's taking your debit card.
Yep.
You got to
Cash is
have
king.
cash. Cash is king. Most everybody will take cash, right? So
Yep.
those are just some of the tips to get through and start formulating a plan. Now let's talk about post event. This can be some of the most frustrating part of a business owner, safety professionals, risk managers' life, is trying to recover and get back up and back to operations. Number one,
Mhm.
you need to gap your insurance right now and see if you have coverage, because you're going to be surprised. A lot of homeowners are also surprised that what they thought they had coverage for, either they
I
don't,
do not.
or the amount that of that coverage is so minuscule you might as well not even have it,
Right.
right?
Right.
So we have to have a plan before the event, a plan during the event, and a plan post event.
Mhm.
And
And I'm gonna take what you said there about getting back to operations. You need to get back to operations, but you need to get back to operations at a better level, right? Because even the most robust business continuity plans, emergency contingency plans, emergency response actions, there are always gaps that you can improve upon, right? And so one of the things that you need to do once you kind of get everything back in order is to really like look at the incident itself, but other incidents that are not on your risk register that now should be, because you have knowledge that something can hit you like this.
exactly. I mean, how many companies, this is hypothetical. I don't like dealing, I like Coach Saban, I don't like dealing with hypotheticals, but how many companies in California had an active tropical storm plan? They haven't been hit in 85 years, right?
Mhm.
So now they got to experience that. So it's not really the wind, it's the results of the rain and all the other things, mudslides and stuff that come with that tropical event. Now, one gap that I find most companies have is a technology plan. if all of your technology is housed in servers that are there on your site, you're in trouble. Okay. You're in trouble if you have a fire, earthquake, hurricane, whatever. So I like to back stuff up in the cloud. If not, somebody's got to go down there and jerk up your server and run with it.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, back in the day, before the cloud, one of James's roles was to grab the server for our company, give it to my wife, and say, head north.
Yeah.
Right? Head north. Get out of here.
Head north and avoid the water.
Avoid the water. But yeah, it's just like any other hazard. But have a recovery plan. Who's going to do what? Who's going to be the coordinator? Who's going to reach out to file the insurance claims? Who's going to make sure that we've got housing for critical staff if we try to get this thing back up? And here's the other thing I'd like to share from a personal note. I have lived through disaster. When I say disaster, I mean not a home standing. People worried about where they're going to get food, medical care. All of their lives destroyed. Now, usually what happens is businesses get back to operations way before folks get their home situation straight. So you need to understand that as a business owner, that these folks got things to worry about more than just what happens at work. You're worried about your business. I understand that. As a business owner, I worry about my business. You know, I spent many years building this organization, and so I wanted to get back to work. But also there's a human side too. Those folks may not have a place to live. They may be struggling with food insecurity. They may have insurance issues. You know, you fix to find out in California. They're fixing to find out. Your homeowner's insurance may not cover that tsunami of water that came down the hill and flooded your house.
Yep.
And you may not be in a floodplain, and now you're fighting between, did the water come from the tropical storm, which could be covered under your general homeowner's insurance policy, or does it come from the flood, which needs to be covered under your flood insurance policy? If you don't have a flood insurance policy, you're in trouble. And the lesson from Hurricane Katrina was the individual was caught in the middle. Homeowner said it was the flooding. Flooding said it was the hurricane, and the homeowner didn't get paid. And by litigating this stuff 2 or 3 or 4 years later, you're sitting there with a house that's destroyed. So business owners need to understand that. That is a very difficult time for everyone. So be patient. Have some plan to address some of the psychosocial hazards that workers may be experiencing during that time, displacement. Help when you can. Know what your resources are. For example, post-event, file a FEMA claim whether or not you feel like you'll qualify. File a FEMA claim. Get on record. Understand that a lot of nonprofit organizations will come to help. You know, people love to talk about, Dr. Martin, what divides America on the left and the right, all this stuff. Let me tell you something. I see what's the best of America when we have natural disasters. I won't get choked up.
Any disaster. Any disaster, right? We see what's best about America. Everybody gets together. Before I forget,
when we couldn't help ourselves, you know, I've always been one who wants to go help other people, and it was hard to take help. It really was. I mean, I'm gonna get choked up about this if I ain't careful. People came from all over the country. They left their homes, loaded up supplies, and headed down to complete strength.
Yeah. You saw that in Harvey in Houston. I mean, there were a lot of stories about that. Before I forget, I want to circle back to resources, right? You said ready.gov. Totally agree with you. if you're that person that's coordinating the risk of certain things or risk of tasks when there might be fall weather or these types of things, the NOAA website for weather.com. Again, contacting your local National Hurricane Center, be contacting your local government, the FEMA, whoever you expect, we all expect to come in when some of these things happen. Find out what the resources are. Okay, I hate to bring up a sore spot, but like look at COVID, right? We didn't plan for a pandemic. We had a flu pandemic back in the early 1900s, right? And they wore masks, right? But it's been 100 years or so. And when this happened, nobody had stockpiled masks, right? I'll tell you right now, there's probably stockpiled masks everywhere. Okay, so that's some of the things that we learn, but we need to keep learning. Okay. The other thing is you have this coordinator that's looking at the risk register and helping you improve after an event. They can't just do it once, okay? It has to be an ongoing process. Whether or not you have another storm for another 20, 30 years, you still need to look every year. Are we prepared? Is it on the risk register? Yes, I know it's low, but it wouldn't be bad to have this X, Y, Z, right? It's low cost to the company to have it on hand. These are the things that you can do to improve after something happens. Nobody's ever going to get it perfectly right if you do good for you.
Heard an emergency manager being interviewed last weekend and about the response out in Maui to the horrible wildfires that tremendous loss of life. He says we've learned in emergency management from our scars. We've learned from our scars. So that's an opportunity for us to look at incidents like this and see what went wrong and what we do to make sure things go right in the future. Now, to bring it back to where Veriforce would help potentially with hiring clients, etc., is determining where the risk is in your critical supply chain and make certain that this continuity plan that companies have makes sense to you and you work together as a team. Hiring client and contractor working together as a team to help mitigate risk. Understand what the risks are. What are we going to do? I like to say this. I use football. I use football. I use all the time. Y'all know I'm going to try to look crazy stuff to say. It's too late to start throwing it up in the dirt when the wires are down the road.
Yep.
Okay. When the hurricane is about to come short, when the tornado sirens go off, it's too late to think about, well, what I'm going to do if our building gets hit by a tornado and we lose, not get the potential loss of life. For example, let's set that aside. What if we lose all the record we have in here? What if we lose all the stuff we have built on this construction site, the refinery that we've been working on, right? And before you make a really good point, right? This is not just about you, subcontractors, and you have the deep supply chain. It affects everybody, right? One little poke in the supply chain can really gum up his business. Example given, it's not hurricane related or anything, but chip shortage. Cars, right? And they made cars go up. I know that's kind of a benign type thing. You can get a car, we can get cars. But one little piece in the supply chain, one little chip has bound up everything. So are you using a subcontractor that's in the Philippines or in a monsoon area or a place where there's tsunamis? Or are you looking at your supply chain as well? Are you demanding of your subcontractors to come into compliance with what your risk tolerance is for the business? Absolutely, because look, things can happen. Now, fortunately, this tropical storm wasn't any worse than it already is. It's causing enough havoc right now, being a tropical storm. What if that had been a Cat 3 hurricane or a Cat 5 hurricane that smacked the port of Los Angeles right in my mouth? Okay? And now our entire transportation distribution network for things that are coming through the Pacific Ocean is shut down.
And we need those things to operate.
We need those things to operate. So really, it's just about planning. It's thinking about it. It's drawing on your resources. Plan for preparation of what we're going to do to get ready for this event, what we're going to do during the event, and then what we're going to do in recovery operations. And be very real with your risk register, and don't say it can't happen here, because it certainly can.
Because it can.
Who would have thought, Dr. Mark? Who would have thought? Okay. During an 85, 88-year occurrence of a tropical storm hitting California, we're also going to have an earthquake.
Right. So here we are. I'm gonna bring this kind of to a close, right? You heard us talk about a lot. Business continuity, emergency action plans, what to do, what not to do, how to continuously improve. Let's just draw it back to that plan, do, check, act, right? We are always in the cycle, always in the cycle. You're not going to do plan, do, check, act, and stop. You're going to do it again, do it again, do it again. And if you don't have that mentality, that's when you learn that you have gaps and the risk overwhelms you. So that's really all I have to say, James. I think this was a great conversation. This is one of our better conversations that we've had. We have great conversations all the time, but this was a really good one. And I hope everybody loved listening to it. If you like listening to us, or you have questions or comments or criticism or whatever, make sure that you follow our page here on YouTube, follow our Risk Matrix podcast, put the questions in the chat. We'll certainly respond to you. And we love that you join us here every week.
Thank y'all for participating, for following us. I see a lot of you, some friends and colleagues out there that watch us routinely every Tuesday or somewhere around noon. This program will be posted on YouTube. Hit that like button, hit subscribe. We love comments. We like a debate. Please join in and tell me. I'd love somebody to tell me you're crazy. You don't need to plan for a natural disaster, man. Just fake it till you make it. That seems to work for me. Hey, I'd love to have that discussion with you. I'd also like to hear your tips on your experiences and what you've done to help prepare for natural disasters and help mitigate risk. Because at the end of the day, we're all trying to get workers home safe from high hazard jobs.
Beautiful. And I'm gonna let you bring us out with
Roll Tide, baby. Go Navy. Football is back.
There you go. Thanks again for listening to the Risk Matrix, and we'll see you next time.